Good morning, guys. So you get my sloppy Sunday morning office look today, but I wanted to go over a couple things. So this is something that I talked about a lot before, but I know sometimes the videos get, so far back on the page and we get new people. I like to refresh things, and it's always good for everyone to hear it again too. So protein sources. This is definitely something that I find is a big issue with a lot of people, is knowing what appropriate protein sources are. So before we start that, the first thing to remember is most foods have a combination of your macronutrients in them. So your macronutrients are carbohydrates, protein, and fats. All foods are made up in some way of those components. Most foods have all three of those components. Just because a food has one of those components in it does not mean that it is a quality source of that macronutrient. So, for example, Cheerios have 2 grams of protein in them per serving. They are not a source of protein whatsoever. Chicken has 2.5 grams of fat per serving. That does not make it a quality source of fat or a fat food. It is a protein because it has 26 grams of protein as opposed to 0 carbs and only 2.5 grams of fat. So the majority of the time, whatever macronutrient is the highest in the food, that is what the source is described as. So something like bread, that yes, most bread does have a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, but the carbohydrate number, when you read the nutrition label, is much higher. So that makes bread a carbohydrate. Then there are certain foods that literally only have one macronutrient. One of the only ones, honestly, that I can even is egg whites. Egg whites are strictly protein. There's nothing else in them. There's no carbs. There's no fat. Whole eggs, on the other hand, are protein and fat, pretty high in fat too. They would still be considered a protein source, but they are very high in fat also. Fruit is 100% carbohydrate. There's now that there are a couple fruits that do have a little bit of fat in them, but for the most part, fruit is strictly carbohydrates, no protein, no fats. But most other foods do have a mixture of the macronutrients, which sometimes can confuse people, and that's where we get into trouble. For those of you who haven't started a meal plan, or you aren't following my meal plan, you read the label on something and you see on the front of the label it says protein, and you assume that this is a good source of protein. Something like, and this is something that came up with a client this week, cream cheese. They were eating cream cheese thinking that it was a good source of protein. Cream cheese is a condiment. It's not a good source of anything. It's a complete junk food. Please do not eat cream cheese thinking that you're getting in protein. Same thing with cheese in general. Cheese, yogurts, things like that. They do have protein. They have a protein source in them, but they are not a good quality source of protein. Why? Because if it is a fat-free cheese product, it's extremely high in carbs. So yes, you have some protein, but you're also getting in so many carbs for how much protein you're getting. And if it is a high-fat cheese or dairy product, you're getting in high fat along with the protein. So let's take a yogurt, for example. So now again, if that's something that's on your meal plan, it's okay, but I have it in your meal plan more so as, a very small amount of protein. That's more of a carbohydrate source for you, not a protein source. So a little container of yogurt usually has about 12 to 15 grams of protein. That's not a lot. That's not high protein at all. But along with that, it could have anywhere from 10 to some of them up to like 20, 27, 30 grams of carbs. So 4 ounces of chicken, on the other hand, has 26 grams of protein. That's a pretty decent protein source. So for you to get the same amount of protein out of the yogurt, you would have to get double the carbohydrates. So now if you would eat 2 of those yogurts, you'd be getting about 30 grams of protein. Let's just say round it off to 30. But you'd also be getting 60 grams of carbs, which is not okay and not appropriate. When the chicken, you could eat 4 ounces of the chicken, you get almost 30 grams of protein and 0 carbs. Same thing with a protein shake. And this is why I give you rules with the protein shakes. You don't want a protein powder that's really high in carbs and fat because it's not a good quality protein. It has all that other stuff in there. You want the protein alone. So a good protein powder has very low carbs and fat, higher protein. So be careful when you're reading labels and understand your quality protein sources are coming from meats, lean meats, chicken, turkey, very, very lean beef, Very lean deer if you're not processing deer meat with anything else in it. Egg whites, fish, lean fish. If you're doing a fattier fish, just, you have to obviously watch what else you're having with it, but that's on your meal plan if you're following it. And then protein powder. Protein powder is just a substitution for any of those lean protein options. So sources of protein should not come from breads and from dairy and from oatmeal, even though they do have some protein in them. They're not a source of protein. Cheeses, things like that. And nuts. Nuts is another big one. Nuts and peanut butter. Yes, they have protein. They are a fat. They have 16, 17, 18 grams of fat per 2 tablespoons, or for nuts, a fourth of a cup, as opposed to only 6 or 7 grams of protein. That is not a protein source. To get the amount of protein that you would get in the chicken from the nuts or the peanut butter, you would be getting almost 100 grams of fat, which is way more than most people need an entire day, in a couple days, let alone in one meal. So be careful where your protein sources are coming from, which once again is why you have a meal plan. If that sounds insanely confusing to you, follow your plan and don't worry about it. But for those of you that like to know and like to understand the process, make sure you're getting your protein from quality protein sources that are low in carbs, low in fat, strictly high quality protein.